trading posts. Why was that? Because this used to be the shoreline of Lake Michigan. In fact, the first military settlement in this city, back in 1803, Fort Dearborn, that used to sit on the other side. Just where this blue awning is, if you go to that intersection of Michigan and Wacker, you're gonna see plaques on the floor that say site of Fort Dearborn. So essentially this is where the city of Chicago was born, just in front of us. And this is where we start to dive into some architecture, starting off with the Wrigley Building, just in front of us to the right with the clock tower. That's a Wrigley Building dating back from 1922 to 1924. The architectural firm responsible for this, Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. We're going to talk about them a lot throughout the tour. This is a very good example of Beaux-Art, which is the oldest style of architecture that we talk about on this tour, 1880s into the 1920s. It's all in the name. Beaux-Art is French for beautiful arts. So what do you have with these buildings? Buildings that are meant to mimic European design. In this case, meant to resemble the Giralda Tower in Seville, Spain, a Spanish cathedral. Beauty was seen as being mutually exclusive with European design at the turn of the century. Because a lot of these early architects, they studied in Europe, a lot of them did study in France, and the books they had to go off of were European books. So they kind of put two and two together. With Beaux-Art, you have buildings that are just larger than life. A lot of ornamentation, a lot of decoration, which is quite the opposite of modernism. So just kind of lay this out for you in a timeline. We really talk about 5 architectural styles, the oldest being Beaux-Art, 1880s to the 1920s, then you have Art Deco, 1920s and 30s, followed by Modernism, which really came about in the 1950s, at least here in Chicago, into the 60s and 70s, then you have Postmodernism, followed by Contemporary, which is everything nowadays. Modernism I placed in the 1950s, but it started in 1918. The School of Bauhaus, Berlin, Germany. One of the directors of that school, a man by the name of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, was considered to be the father of modernism. One of his last designs is a black building over here on the right, the AMA Plaza, formerly known as the IBM building. Modernism is all about this idea that less is more. Mies van der Rohe believed form follows function. That school of thought is seen as being extreme by the Nazi Party. Architects scattered throughout the world, including here to Chicago, including Mies van der Rohe. He actually taught here at IIT. Funny enough, one of his students is responsible for the 2 corncob buildings that sit right next to his work. His student's named Bertram Goldberg. So you can see that the teacher and student, they didn't really see eye to eye. Very different designs, right? Whereas Mies van der Rohe believed form follows function, his student Bertram Goldberg believed form follows social function. And what do I mean by that? He's focused on the social aspect of buildings. So the 2 corncob buildings on this property, it's all residential, and very questionable parking, but it's all valet, so it's all right. But it's much more than that. Let's say you live inside this building, you want to rent a boat for the day. All you gotta do is go downstairs, there's a marina, you can rent an electric boat, maybe a small yacht. If you're hungry, guess what? You have gourmet dining. Fine dining establishments like Smith & Wolenski's and Subway. And if you're bored, there's a House of Blues to go see some live music. You want to go bowling, there's a bowling alley. They have a place where you can just kind of put your head on your hand while you're leaning over a railing, looking blissfully out to the distance, thinking about life. A place like Dick's Last Resort. You have, there's a market, there's a small post office. That place is a city within a city, and that's what it was meant to be. Designed by Bertram Goldberg in the 1960s as a way to reinvigorate downtown. The downtown setting back then was not what we have today. People were working in the city, commuting back home somewhere else. You wanted to change that, make this a place where people would live, work, and play. So by creating these little utopias with everything around you, why leave your home? And we're going to see that same idea used later in one of his other designs. For the time being though, just in front of us on the right-hand side, you're going to see this red building. The clock tower says Whirlpool on the very top of it. This is the Reed Murdoch Center, dating back from 1914. If you use that clock tower as a point of reference, you're going to notice the building is not symmetrical. So it's separated into sections. Leading up until the clock tower, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections. Clock tower right in the middle. On the other side, they have only 5. So it's not symmetrical, but it was until 1930. That's when the city decided to tear down a whole side of that building just to make this street in front of us, LaSalle Street, wider than what it was. There was a lot of traffic on here, a lot of congestion, so they said, you know what, let's make this street wider by tearing down the side of that building. This is a very good example of how this city has grown, manipulating our surroundings to work for us. That's what we've done from the get-go. Like this river. This river was never this wide, it was never this deep. We dredged it to allow for more boat traffic, larger boats. Streets have also gotten taller, not just wider, and that was done to improve sanitation, add more sewage lines. But through all that change, we never really forget where we come from, and that's what this building does on the left. This is the Builders Building. Two different sections, two different eras, two different firms. The original section directly off to the left, with the columns of the basement. 1926, Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. That newer section, 1987, Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. If you separate the building horizontally, you can do it into three components. You can see the columns, right? Columns have three components to them: a base, a shaft, a capital. Both sections can be separated into those three components. That's called a tripartite facade. You see that a lot with that older style of architecture, with Beaux-Art and even Art Deco. So it's a way for this newer firm to pay respect to the older one, paying respect to what came before. These two firms are powerhouses. Another Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White design, this building right here. This is the Merchandise Mart, dating back from 1930, when this was the largest building in the world. Over 4 million square feet of space inside of here. It sits on 2 city blocks, has its own stop and elevated train system, had its own zip code until 2008. And originally it was owned by Marshall Field. Marshall Field, best known for Marshall Fields, eventually became Macy's. He was in retail. In fact, those heads that you see right there, those are the busts of different retailers. This originally was just a big building used as a warehouse for product. Nowadays, inside there you have a mixture of home design and decoration stores, your furniture stores, shared office spaces. And over here on the right-hand side, we're gonna have residential. This land is called Wolf Point, also the name of the buildings. There's one that's already finished, straight ahead of us with the reflective glass. That's Wolf Point West. Directly off to the right, that's gonna be Wolf Point East. And then on the southern section of this land, Wolf Point South. 3 buildings right here where the river opens, and all 3 branches of the Chicago River meet. So if you don't have your cameras out, now's a pretty good photo opportunity. The city just kind of opens up. The main branch of the Chicago River is what we started on. The south branch sits over on the left. We're gonna slightly veer onto the north branch. It's not a coincidence that there are 3 buildings here where 3 branches meet. That's something known as contextualism. We see that with architecture. Architecture that mimics its surroundings. Now, if you were to look at this from an aerial view, it will look a lot like the letter Y. And as you walk throughout the city, you're gonna notice this inside traffic light boxes, electrical boxes, manhole covers for sewers at the foot of bridges, a lot of city works. You see this emblem, it's a circle with a Y inside of it. That represents this convergence. Because prior to the city becoming a city in 1837, you would have seen one of the first trading posts on the right-hand side. And right next to that, there was a bar, and there was a bar behind us, and there was a bar to the left. And there was a boat that took you from bar to 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 bar. A floating bar crawl happening before we were considered a city. Those are priorities. And if you agree with that, we have a bar on board. And that's a segue, everybody. Curtis is your bartender. He has drinks for you: beer, wine, soda, chips, pretzels, water, shots for Fabian's last night out as a single woman. You picked an architectural tour? I mean, no, that was a good choice. It was a good choice. I like that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, I'm way better. I'm from Miami, actually, so I'm borderline good with Miami. So we're gonna be going up the North Branch right here. Some buildings that point out. This one here on the left, this red building, this is the Fulton House. Oldest building that we encounter on the tour, dating back from 1898. Back when this was a cold storage facility, just a big icebox. That's all it was. It did not have windows, did not have balconies. Those had to be created. It took 3 months for the building to thaw out enough to do work to it. Back in the 1980s. Now the guy that spearheaded that, his name Harry Weiss, he designed these buildings right here, the Riverside Cottages. The entire building in the form of a triangle. A lot of triangular elements. That's because Harry Weiss, also a sailor, avid sailor. He loved being on a sailboat. This guy uses triangles because they look like the silhouette of sailboats. We're gonna see some more of his work a bit later on in the tour. But for right now, we're gonna turn the boat around so that we can go south and see all the big stuff. As we do that, I want to give you this opportunity to stretch your legs. Go use the restrooms, grab something to drink at the bar. If you have any questions, raise your hand and I'll come around and answer those questions for you. Get your cameras ready. Just behind us and then eventually in front of us is one of the best views of the city. It's very Instagrammable. #Shoreline Boat Tours. I'll be back on in just a little bit. Enjoy.